Some mornings begin loudly, others end that way. This one didn't either. On March 3rd, 1931, just after sunrise, the usual noise of Harlem stopped mid-breath. Not slowly, not naturally. It stopped the way sound does when something goes wrong and no one knows how to react. There were no speeches, no sirens at first, no warning. Above West 131st Street, something moved slightly in the cold air. The sound wasn't dramatic, just a faint creak of tension where it didn't belong. Across the street, a diner opened like it always did. Coffee was poured, a cup was set down, it cooled, untouched. A newspaper slipped from someone's hand and landed on the sidewalk, folded just enough to hide the headline. People began to gather, one by one, then dozens, then hundreds. By the time anyone counted, more than 200 people stood there, not screaming, not running, just frozen, unsure whether it was safer to look up or to pretend they hadn't seen anything at all. Someone near the back whispered a few letters under their breath, not loudly, almost like a habit they wished they could stop. By 8:17 a.m., patrol officers arrived. By 8:19, they had already stepped back. Their hands weren't raised. Their weapons stayed where they were. Their eyes moved, not toward what everyone was staring at, but toward windows, rooftops, and doorways. That detail mattered, because this wasn't just a killing. It was a message delivered in public, in daylight, without urgency or apology. And everyone there understood the question it left hanging behind it. What happens when humiliation is intentional and witnessed? The man at the center of it all was connected to a powerful figure from downtown. That connection wasn't hidden, it was the point. And the most important detail of all, that powerful man was not there. By noon, word reached him quietly. No phone calls, no paperwork, just a voice lowered enough to avoid memory. He listened without interruption. He asked no questions. He stared at a dark mark on the table, shaped vaguely like a continent, and after a long pause, he said only this: "Give me a week." That was all. If stories like this matter to you, stories that explain how power actually works, consider subscribing. And while you're watching, let us know in the comments, what time is it where you are and where are you watching from? By nightfall, Harlem looked normal. Streetlights came on, shops glowed, someone played a muted trumpet above Lenox Avenue, but nothing felt the same. The evidence was removed by late afternoon. No ceremony, no official photographs. The record would later list unknown individuals and no confirmed motive. Unofficially, everyone knew better. This wasn't random, it wasn't reckless, it was staged. The goal wasn't chaos, it was division, to place one identity in the wrong place and wait for reaction. And yet, what followed surprised everyone. There was no explosion of violence, no immediate response. Instead, there was discipline. A barber swept his floor slower than usual, eyes never leaving the door. A woman folded the same newspaper 3 times without reading it. In a small betting house, all money was quietly returned with no explanation. Nothing felt safe, not even silence. Police presence increased that night. Records show patrol coverage rose noticeably. Arrests, however, dropped to 0. Cars passed intersections without slowing. Officers parked, shut off engines, and waited. But Harlem didn't react. That was the first twist, because in this city, retaliation was expected. Instead, there was restraint. Downtown, the man everyone expected to act did not raise his voice. He spent the night in a borrowed apartment, curtains half drawn, one lamp on, coffee poured, and never touched. 3 men came to him with answers. Each promised speed, each wanted action before morning. He refused all of them. Instead, he asked about details others ignored: where the rope came from, who sold it, what kind of knot had been used. When told it was done cleanly, professionally, he nodded once. That told him everything. This was not impulse, it was performance. Outside, a car idled too long. He noticed, watched the exhaust rise and disappear. When it finally drove away, he said quietly, "They want a reaction, so they won't get one." By midnight, something began spreading through the city, not rage, but expectation. 7 days. No one knew who started it, no message was delivered, but everyone seemed to understand. 7 days to correct something that had been allowed to happen. And that understanding changed behavior.
Delivery skipped certain blocks. A freight elevator stayed broken. A police captain reassigned himself without filing paperwork. This wasn't preparation for a fight. It was preparation for consequence. On March 4th, the man finally went uptown. Not loudly, not surrounded, not hidden either. He walked the last stretch alone. The meeting room sat above a fish market. Salt still clung to the floorboards. 4 men waited inside. No one spoke when he entered. That silence wasn't fear, it was comprehension. This wasn't a meeting for instructions, it was a meeting for listening. He sat, set his gloves beside a folded map. A cup was poured automatically. He didn't touch it. Names were offered, locations, suspicions. He stopped them with one finger, then asked a single question. Who saw it? Not who did it, not how. Who witnessed it? The answer came carefully. Children, women at windows, neighbors, passers-by. Around 200. He repeated the number once slowly. 200 memories could not be erased. They could only be addressed. This was the second twist. He wasn't planning revenge. He was measuring damage. Timing mattered. 8 minutes for response was too fast. Someone had been waiting. He spoke again. They wanted noise, he said. We'll give them precision. He assigned days, not actions. Observation, confirmation, pressure. Pressure didn't mean harm. It meant interruption. That afternoon, people began talking, not publicly, not officially, but accurately. Details corrected themselves. A rope purchased uptown, not downtown. A vehicle tied to a business that hadn't operated properly in weeks. A patrolman crossing the street early. Nothing written, nothing signed. That evening, he visited a small church. No speech, no prayer, just presence. He left exactly $7 by the door. The number stayed with people. While everyone expected him to harden, he slowed down. Harlem didn't become an army. It became a network of witnesses. Emergency calls dropped. Noise disappeared. Control replaced fear. By the 5th day, things stopped working. Not people, systems. A printing press jammed without breaking. A coal delivery never arrived. A truck stalled with keys still inside. No reports filed, no accusations made. This was not retaliation. It was a reminder. He walked the streets openly, sat down, ordered coffee, left before it arrived. Years later, a waitress would say, "That's how I knew something big was coming." He didn't drink it. Information moved faster than threats. Ledgers changed quietly. Doors stayed open just long enough. And on the 7th day, no announcement came. Because by then, everyone understood something far more important. Power isn't always loud. Control doesn't always bleed. Sometimes the most effective response is to decide what will be remembered and what will never be repeated. And Harlem remembered.
A donation receipt was placed in the wrong folder. It was a small mistake, almost invisible. The secretary who filed it didn't know the name on the paper belonged to an organization operating out of state, one that nobody in Harlem wanted publicly associated with anything local. The error wasn't intentional, that was the point. None of the people involved had ever met Lucky Luciano. They didn't need to. Influence only works when it moves without direct contact. By midweek, the New York City Police Department began to notice a pattern. Not crime, not violence, something harder to define. Nothing illegal was happening, no weapons, no disturbances, no arrests that would stick. And yet, internal reports quietly flagged a growing issue across multiple Harlem precincts. Doors weren't being answered. Questions were met with polite silence. Sources who had talked freely for years suddenly couldn't remember names. Not refused, forgot. That Wednesday evening, Lucky met with only one person. The apartment overlooked St. Nicholas Park. The curtains stayed open on purpose. Visibility mattered now. Between them sat a folded newspaper. The headline face down, never read. That was deliberate, too. The man asked the question others were afraid to voice. Is it time to push harder? Lucky shook his head. Not yet, he said. They still think this is about anger. By then, the idea of a 7-day limit had moved beyond Harlem. Downtown bars picked it up first, then the docks, then police houses. No one could trace it back to Lucky. That made it dangerous. Rumors don't need leadership, they only need repetition. By the end of the third day, the impact could be measured. Freight delays linked to just 4 addresses caused losses estimated at $42,000. That wasn't enough to shake the city, but it was focused enough to alarm the people involved. Phone records later showed outgoing calls from those same locations jumped sharply. Most were never answered. That night, Lucky stood alone at a window looking north. Traffic vibrated faintly through the glass. For the first time since the public display days earlier, his jaw tightened. Not in anger, in recognition. They were starting to understand, and there were still 3 days left. March 7th, 1931, Day 5. This was the day fear changed direction. Until now, the pressure had been indirect, delays, interruptions, confusion. Friday morning gave it weight. At 9:12 a.m., a payroll envelope meant for a construction crew connected to a known organizer never arrived. It wasn't stolen, it wasn't intercepted, it simply didn't show up. The courier later described the doorway perfectly, even remembered the smell of fresh paint in the hallway. The envelope itself seemed to disappear from memory. This was the turn no one expected. Money, legitimate money, had become unreliable. By noon, 4 small businesses linked through donations and shared suppliers reported the same problems: invoices misplaced, permits slowed, signatures delayed. Nothing could be traced back to Lucky Luciano. Nothing could be fixed quickly either, and that was intentional. Violence ends arguments. Uncertainty stretches them. That afternoon, Lucky sat quietly in the back of a barber shop on 134th Street. No haircut, no conversation. He watched one man trim another's hair slowly, carefully, as if time itself had become fragile. A towel slipped from the chair and wasn't picked up right away. No one rushed anymore. A runner brought Lucky a message written lightly in pencil on scrap paper. He read it once and tore it in half. The message wasn't a threat. It was a request. "Can we talk?" Lucky didn't respond. He didn't have to. Conversation is what people ask for when leverage is gone. By evening, police commanders faced a choice they would never document. Patrols could be increased, but to what end? There were no crimes to interrupt, no witnesses willing to speak, no cooperation to build cases on. Harlem had become administratively invisible. Later reviews showed something unusual. Response times improved, actual enforcement dropped. Officers arrived faster and left sooner. Just before sunset, Lucky walked past a church. A light was on inside. A coffee cup sat on the steps, untouched, already cooling. He noticed it. Then he kept walking. This is where the story turns outward. If you were a shop owner watching permits stall with no explanation, if you were a police captain realizing authority only works when people believe in it, if you believed public humiliation was permanent power, what would you do with 2 days left? That night, a sentence began circulating. It was spoken differently each time, but the meaning never changed. Sunday decides everything. Lucky returned to his room. He sat on the edge of the bed and removed his gloves. His hands were steady. Not clean, but steady. He checked the clock. 2 days remained. March 9th, 1931, Day 7. This was the final twist and the most dangerous one. Nothing happened. Men who expected retaliation woke early, listening for sounds that never came. By 8 a.m., phones rang, then stopped. By 10 a.m., an insurance office downtown quietly suspended coverage on 3 Harlem properties, citing unverifiable risk exposure. No appeal process, no explanation beyond that phrase. Lucky didn't move that morning. He sat at a small table. Sunlight cut across the wood in sharp angles. A notebook lay open now. Not names, not plans.
Just times, written in the margins. Times already passed. At 11:26 a.m., A warehouse lease was flagged for review. At 11:41, a utility crew failed to restore power after a routine outage. By noon, 2 patrol supervisors requested reassignment voluntarily. Later analysis would show that in one day, delays rippled across 9 city departments. A statistical anomaly. This was when leadership understood the trap. To intervene now meant admitting earlier failure. To act forcefully meant acting alone. No witnesses, no cooperation, no paperwork that would hold. Authority without belief becomes performance. And performance without an audience collapses. Lucky stood in the early afternoon. He put on his coat and walked. 1 block, then another. People noticed and looked away. Not out of fear, out of respect for the boundary he had drawn. A man nodded once. Lucky nodded back. That was the exchange. Somewhere, a decision was being weighed by people who once believed humiliation lasted forever. That belief had cost them 7 days. 7 days of lost control. 7 days of uncertainty. Here's the final question. When power stops answering you, do you push harder? Or do you step back before history starts paying attention? No one knows exactly who made the call, only that by nightfall, enforcement slowed, files stopped moving, patrol cars stayed parked. The city chose the path that allowed it to breathe. Lucky returned to his room. He closed the notebook, placed it in a drawer, and didn't lock it. Outside, Harlem exhaled, not loudly, not in celebration, just release. Silence finished the work. March 10th, 1931. The 8th day felt different. Not because something new happened, but because nothing else ever would. By the 8th morning, the street looked ordinary again, too ordinary. Rain had passed through before dawn, washing away the last faint mark on the pavement. Whatever discoloration had once been there was gone, as if the ground itself had decided it was finished remembering. A shopkeeper lifted his gate later than usual, paused, then apologized to no one in particular. A newspaper lay folded on a stoop, its headline hidden, as though words had finally run out of usefulness. The body was gone. Officially processed, officially transferred, unofficially erased. In that year, fewer than 2/3 of similar cases across the country ever led to formal charges. This one would not. No suspects, no follow-up. It would be filed under the kind of category officers used when memory was expected to do what paperwork could not. Lucky Luciano never returned to that street. That absence mattered more than any appearance would have. Powerful men are remembered for what they do. Enduring men are remembered for what they refuse to repeat. Lucky never spoke publicly about what happened. He never demanded recognition. He never claimed responsibility for the 7 days that followed. Claiming ownership would have weakened the rule. Instead, something quieter took hold. In Harlem, the lesson moved faster than any warning ever could. Humiliation, when witnessed, changes the equation. You could end a life, but when you turned it into display, when you made it public and unavoidable, the response stopped being personal. It became structural, slow, exhausting, and impossible to escape. Police behavior shifted after that week, not dramatically, but permanently. Patrol routes stabilized. Informants became careful with exaggeration. Silence began to be understood not as resistance, but as information. An unwritten understanding settled in. Some lines once crossed in public could not be uncrossed without consequence.
Lucky left New York not long after, not in retreat, in completion. Years later, men who had never met him would still repeat the rule, often without knowing its origin. Don't make it public. Don't humiliate. Don't mistake display for dominance. Because if you do, someone else will decide the timing, and history will cooperate with them. The rope was gone. The street was ordinary again. But the city remembered. Not loudly, not proudly, accurately. History rarely announces when it has finished teaching. It simply changes behavior and waits to see who notices. What happened that week was not remembered because of violence. It was remembered because restraint forced everyone else to move. The community learned that silence could align without instruction. The police learned that authority collapses when belief disappears. And Lucky Luciano learned, perhaps more clearly than ever, that power lasts longer when it does not rush to be seen. The spark was not death alone, it was the display of it, the daylight, the witnesses who could not unsee what they had seen. From that moment forward, nothing was impulsive. Every hour was measured, every response delayed just long enough to become inevitable. People often ask why everything didn't explode. They misunderstand the moment. Violence would have ended the story too quickly. What followed instead was heavier, slower, a lesson that required cooperation from people who would never appear in records or courtrooms, only in memory. Over time, details blurred, exact streets, exact faces, but the rules survived, passed quietly, half-spoken, never written down. Don't make it public. Don't confuse humiliation with power, because once a community witnesses disrespect, the response no longer belongs to one person. It belongs to time. Somewhere in Harlem, life resumed again. Coffee cups were lifted again. Newspapers unfolded. Patrol cars followed familiar routes. And beneath the ordinary motion, the city carried a new understanding, one written not in ink, but in hesitation. That is how history survives. Not in monuments, not in headlines, but in the choices people quietly stop making.